Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of The Radical Secular. My name is Sean Prophet. I'm coming to you from Henderson, Nevada.
My name is Christophe Difo. I'm coming to you from Jersey City, New Jersey. I don't know what the nickname is here. I think there's we call it Dirty Jersey City sometimes. Let's go with that.
And we have with us our guest, John Kirbow.
I'm in Chinatown, Manhattan, New York.
Welcome. Well, First I want to do a few show notes just to talk to everybody a little bit about what we're doing here. We have been basically building this plane of this show while we've been flying, and we started out doing a few weeks ago doing our first test episode. And we're still branding our channel. We've got some exciting logo art coming. Really brilliant designer named Tim who is working with us. And so at this point, we have not done any advertising or promotion whatsoever. We're just kind of sharing this video with our friends. We hope you will share it as well because we're trying to grow our audience. But soon we will be launching the Facebook page, a rebranded Facebook page, and our YouTube channel, and starting to promote. Thinking also we're going to probably post this video on Facebook video as well, just because we want to have as many possible avenues for people to see it. But we'll be getting some very positive feedback, and thank you for all of that. So I guess we'll start off.
Let me just jump in real quick too. Another thing we're going to try and do is, you and I talked about this earlier, Sean, is about, trying to sort of make sure that our guests are that we do get on are diverse, right? So we have different perspectives. Certainly we could certainly use some women around here. That'd be great. To sort of get this is a dude fest over here.
Dude fest. Like the military.
Yeah, like the military. That'd be great. I think that kind of perspective would be different. So we get some other perspectives as time goes on, and and a
global perspective as well. Because we're all Americans, and
exactly, that's another one.
Global perspective is good. Gay, transgender, Latina perspective. We'd like to get, Asian, so if anybody is out there and you would like to be a part of this, you would like to talk to us on the Radical Secular, our really one thing that we have in common is that we do not want religion and politics to mix. We think that separation of church and state is the most important thing about our Constitution. And we also believe that, equality, cosmopolitan, liberal approach to reality is really the only approach that matters. So if that's how you feel, if you want to be a part of a conversation about that, then please, contact us on Facebook or wherever, and we see if we can get you on the show.
Absolutely. And another thing we're going to be trying to do as well, we're going to try and I'm going to be working a lot on the sort of social element of this. So we're going to try in terms of social media marketing. So soon we're going to have our Instagram account up and a Twitter account up. So definitely encourage you to follow those as they develop. And like Sean said, we are really developing this on the fly, having a good time doing it. And so we'll sort of continue to update you and let you know as things sort of evolve. So I guess that's probably a lot of time doing show notes that we should probably
Yeah. And so we got to do one of our traditions here in the show that we've established is, we're doing our T-shirt. So if you come on the show, you got to bring a T-shirt of one sort or another, something relevant, something that has a story for you. So mine is obvious, and we're seeing a lot of treason in this administration, and especially this week. We'll be talking a little bit about that. And Christophe, what does your shirt represent?
Sure. So this shirt is from the movie Starship Troopers, and that movie in the Mobile Infantry is like the central feature of that book and that movie, both of which are very, very good. The movie is a cult classic. But the point is, the reason why I'm bringing it today is because we're going to be talking a little bit about. The point is this movie is about a fascist system, essentially an authoritarian system, but like a benevolent one, kind of. But anyway, that's sort of the shtick of the whole thing. But we're going to be talking today a lot about some of the sort of more fascistic elements of the Trump administration, particularly out in Portland. So I thought that was sort of a relevant tie in there.
Yeah, and John, we'll throw it over to you. You can take it away. Tell us about your shirt and your background.
Sure. So the shirt is basically, it says terminate hate. You see flowers coming out of the rifle there. Arnold put this shirt out after Charlottesville. He's like, we don't need to terminate Sarah Connor. We need to terminate the Nazis, the bad people. So, yeah, But I think it symbolizes something we can all organize around as Americans across tribal partisan lines, across ideology. If you're a halfway decent human being with half a brain, this makes sense. The debate is how do we best go about it? So my background, I was in the active Army for about 6 years, and one of my areas was broadly speaking, special operations or irregular warfare, specifically psychological operations. So how do you understand people at the psychological level, looking at cultures and behaviors in the wider environment they're in? And how do you influence people for a behavior change? How do you mitigate Shia Sunni violence, get people to vote, talk with tribal elders, talk to whether it's shop owners, sheep herders, the whole spectrum of human psychology and behavior. We try to use that on the battlefield as a force multiplier to reduce violence as well as to try to make peace. And there's many different types of psyop. It's not all friendly, but it basically is about understanding people and how do you influence behaviors. And that's very relevant because when I came home, I had the training, the experience I had the ultimate bullshit detector. Whenever a politician opened their mouth and they were doing their marketing campaign, whether it was corporate propaganda or someone on TV running a political campaign, I saw the tricks they did, and I saw the way they were playing on race and resentment and psychology and dividing people, whether it's poor blacks against poor whites or whether it's trying to appeal through insinuation and dog whistle. And I understand Lenin's playbook and the way the Kremlin uses that same playbook to manipulate people across cyberspace. I could train a 10-year-old in their mom, with a 4-pack of Monster to manipulate liberals and conservatives on Facebook. I could train that maybe like a 15-year-old. Give me 10 minutes, I could teach them how to use certain talking points to go into certain Twitter spaces to get people to shout at each other, to get feminists and men's rights activists to yell at each other. So what the Kremlin is currently doing to us to undermine our democracy and to try to capitalize on our vulnerabilities, I've been writing a book on how to explain this to the average American, but it's the same toolkit they use in political campaigns. It came from Madison Avenue with advertising and then World War II and our science of anti-Nazi propaganda. The same science was used by Goebbels and others. And a classic example is in World War II, the honor system, the Bushido honor system during Emperor Hirohito forbade people to surrender. They'd rather die than lose face.
Absolutely.
So instead of saying surrender, the pamphlet said cease resistance. And an analogous technique we would use if we were to employ this kind of thinking in America, certain people, you have to understand their behavioral moral framework, like Jonathan Haidt says, their moral psychology. A lot of people see the mask as a symbol of oppression, and they see not wearing a mask as a symbol of freedom. Now, as dumb as that is, if I want to persuade some of them to wear a mask, what I'm going to do is appeal to something else they value. For example, wear a mask. It's a sign of respect. You don't have to wear a mask, quote unquote. Of course, I know you don't have to listen to the government, but you should wear a mask, and freedom-loving people want to wear masks because it's a sign of respect and family values and Jesus, and of course you want to wear a mask. We want to really appeal to something we can identify around because most people have some value system you can engage with productively. And so that's what we try to do. Then I got out of the military, did some worked as a civilian, kind of a horror of war contractor turned DOD civilian. I worked in Afghanistan with an applied social science and anthropology program called Humanitarian System. So we were like the Oprah Winfrey of the war zone, kind of like marriage counselors between brigade combat teams and Afghan culture and tribal leaders. So we'd wear the local attire and go Kevin Costner and like actually sit down with people and try to mitigate conflict and reduce violence. And then I applied that thinking and those skills to try to look at our problems here at home. You take a community like Ferguson, the police are not talking to the community. There's decades of systemic oppression and racism. How do you analyze the problem by sitting down, shutting up, listening to the population, mapping out people's grievances, identifying the marginalized groups, letting them create their own map of their own community? That can save lives and mitigate risk, whether it's a multinational corporation working in Africa or South America, or it's police working in Ferguson or in Brooklyn. Understanding the people is the center of gravity, and respecting those people and letting them have a voice, you can stop riot. That is the best tool we have to avoid riots. So I've been trying for the last 10 years to scale up a system where veterans can work with locals and neighborhoods and mitigate risk and empower people. And my other focus is countering propaganda, giving people the tools to understand how they're being fucked with, how they're being manipulated across the political spectrum. And how do you reach people? How do you reach people in the heartland? How do you reach people in the Rust Belt through effective communication? So I combine war zone lessons of tribal engagement with academia and social science. So I identify as a social science warrior. So basically social justice, but without any of the fundamentalism, just pure, how do we help people and how do we have the best tools to do it? So,
wow. That's a whole lot. I mean, I know that you have some things you want to say, Christophe, but I want to just start out really quick by saying that, a lot of what you're talking about, it involves, turning around, because the reason people believe propaganda is because it tells them something that they want to hear. And, they don't want to hear that, wearing a mask, for example, is a public health requirement. So what they want to hear is that they're free not to. But my issue with that is that, what do you do about the people who just still refuse? Because you got something like this, it's a collective action problem. You could have 5% of people not wearing masks and they could get everybody else sick. So how do you bridge that gap between, people who've been told what they want to hear, which is that they're free, that this is a symbol of oppression, and, versus public health?
Yeah. Well, it's a huge, COVID brings a real kind of nonlinear component to this because of the way it spreads and the very rapid and hidden way it spreads and the way it exponentially spreads. It creates a kind of risk where there's some people we're just not going to reach. There's limitations to what I call the non-lethal toolkit. So some of what we do overseas, we're trained to, shoot, move, communicate, kick indoors. We're also trained, in my case, I speak a number of languages like Arabic, some Farsi, German, Russian, Spanish, etc. We can use that non-lethal toolkit as a force multiplier as well, but it has limitations. Some people, they're going to be a walking safety hazard, and they're going to spread it. And I don't have all the answers. That's where I think we need to use something called the OODA loop, which means observe, orient, decide, act. Basically, it's the scientific way of thinking. We say, let's observe what we're seeing. Let's orient ourselves to the problem by constantly updating our beliefs. Let's really try to understand what's going on. Then make the best decision based on risk assessment and cost benefit. Take action, but then we continually look for feedback, measures of effectiveness. Was this effective? Did what we did it work? Did it not work? Why or why not? And as we do that, we're constantly updating our belief system to adapt in a very evolutionary fashion. So one policy might be effective at containing it in one city and not in another. And we say, why is that? So we're always trying to update and evolve our beliefs. And I think if people share best practices across the country, it's like a Wikonomical bottom-up way to identify what works and what does not work. And I think, and when we talk about policing later, I think the same thing can happen. How do you identify practices that will start riots versus ways to respect the community? So with COVID, though, it's really tricky. I honestly don't know. I mean, get people that are within their moral tribe. Like if we could find some evangelicals that'll go on TV or go on, I think Pat Robertson actually said, wear a freaking mask or something. I don't know what his words were. I may be wrong. If
Mitch McConnell is on board with masks.
What's that?
I think that's really important. I think a couple of things that resonate with me that you just said, John, and I think one of the things is and this is starkly absent in human culture, but certainly American culture, and that is a willingness to update one's beliefs with changing information. We saw that right early on. It was don't buy masks, right? Leave it for the the masks aren't as effective as we thought, or leave them for the healthcare workers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, no, wear masks. And that's because the way we think about things has evolved. Just to piggyback a little bit on what you're talking about, though, I love the approach that you're talking about. The approach of there's an organization that I follow called Better Angels that I think is
I'm aware, yeah.
Space. I'm sure you probably are aware of it. And this same space of basically trying to get people in the room and find common ground. And so if you're able to sort of sell something on the sort of moral, the sort of moral foundation upon which X, Y, and Z person sort of like builds their life, and you can sell masks on that basis, and that seemed like the most effective approach. But to Sean's point, and this is a huge problem, right? There's going to be those people on the extremes that you just can't reason with, right?
Yeah.
That they are just, and most of the time that may not matter because we can overwhelm them politically. But when it comes to, But when it comes to a disease, though, right?
Yeah.
A communicable disease, we have a serious problem. So, like, how do we? I don't know. And like you said, there's no easy answers to this. But maybe we do need to have more. Like, the stick has to be there too, not just the carrot, right? The stick has to be there for those people who are just beyond reason.
And this goes all the way to the top. I mean, this goes to the treason aspect. You've got an American president who is committing democide, which is basically the leader of a country killing his own people. And it's not just us. It's happening in Brazil. it's happening, possibly in China. China's so opaque that we have no idea what's really going on there. But our president is absolutely committing democide. He wants to send the kids back to school. He's doing all of that. So, we don't ask people permission to have drunk driving laws, right? If somebody is driving drunk, it's like everybody has to comply. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what party you belong to. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or an atheist. You cannot drive drunk. And I don't understand why, other than, the fact that we've got a treason party in charge, why that isn't true for all public health questions. Why isn't it just a requirement?
That's an interesting point. I mean, I've always thought that the public health approach, the approach of harm reduction, should be our fundamental paradigm for all our social policies. The drug war, case in point, we have this puritanical history of having a retributional approach to justice, which I think is archaic and outdated. And then the 70s and 80s saw the rise of the fear-based drug war and special interests, and that was a fundamentally emotion-based policy. To me, that's the modern version of witchcraft or spell casting or sacrificing a chicken in the middle of a fucking village. That should be just as discredited. If your policy is not based on data-driven, evidence-based approaches to reduce harm, you should be no more credible than someone going to a witch doctor. That should be the way we shift the conversation. So for the drug war, it should be based on what is the best way to reduce harm through data-driven approaches. The end goal being public health. Public health meaning, how do we identify a problem and reduce the harm in the most effective way? How do we measure it? And adults understand this. In my opinion, this should be basically the adult table and the child's table. If you don't understand this, you're not thinking like. The problem is smart people are better at rationalizing bullshit. This speaks to the heart of the COVID problem. The smarter you are, the better you are at doing mental gymnastics to believe what you want to believe, because we're evolutionarily hardwired, and you all know this, to avoid changing our mind and defend our beliefs. The brain doesn't want to be wrong. So like in the savannah, we have the fast thinking system to react instinctively to avoid predators. And that carries over into the way we are defensive against changing our beliefs. It goes against our thinking brain, which works slower. Daniel Kahneman talks about this. And so, it's a matter of like, you got to go through the emotional brain, the fast brain first to get the rational brain. So like the gateway to the mind is through the heart. So most of the time, to throw facts at them, they're going to double down. They're like a boxer. They're going to just, try to block what you're doing. But if you go through to their emotions and identify some common ground, identify shared moral concern, find that political G-spot and say, hey, we're going to,
political G-spot. I love it.
That's what it is. I hate to say it.
I know,
like
you
the cheat code. This is like the cheat code to a video game.
Absolutely.
Ideologues on whatever site. Ideologues are a video game with a cheat code. You got to find that cheat code and engage it. And it has a lot of, it's not that they're stupid for them. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times.
Sometimes it definitely is.
Yeah, there's some dumbasses out there, but a lot of times the biggest people that are big on conspiracies are smart people. They have all the architecture in place to argue against it. The more facts you throw at them, the more they double down. You got to find an emotional entry point. And I think for, the brain's evolved that way. So we have to understand, like, for countering disinformation, same idea. We have to have a toolkit in place, like maybe a mass communications campaign, a Manhattan Project style means of disseminating messages to multiple audiences through mass media, like not a government psyop, but actually citizen-led, privately funded Elon Musk style innovation that can actually reach people across the spectrum by engaging them at the heart level. So then they'll change their minds slowly. And that's hard to do. It's going to require people in their moral community, in their tribal community, just say, hey, this is disinfo. Here's why. But disinfo is hard to counter directly. Same thing with, any bullshit belief. It's really hard to just,
Well, I was going to say it's kind of a threefold problem, because what you said is true, that people who are smarter have more cognitive tools to rationalize anything that they want to believe, right? But then there's also, I just read an article today saying that the people who don't want to wear masks have lower cognitive skills. So maybe on that one thing, that may be,
that's true.
But there's both things can be true at the same time, I think. But there's a third factor, and that is that we've got powerful people who are pushing propaganda viewpoints that use all the techniques that you're talking about. I mean, whether it's the Russian government, whether it's the Trump campaign, whether it's a corporate America, fossil fuel companies, whether it's the Murdochs who are making money off this stuff, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. You've got a lot of powerful people, with a lot of so if you wanted to do a top-down Manhattan Project type of thing, you'd be literally having to fight against all of these giant, influences. So what do you do?
The analogy I use, psyop, the psychological warfare, is basically, it's not good or bad. It's like the Force in Star Wars. It's a set of tools. The problem is most people who've been using it, as you just explained, are Sith. They use it for malicious goals, whether it's corporatism, foreign disinformation from China, Iran, or especially Russia, political propaganda for, divide and conquer, Southern strategy. I mean, just the whole history of propaganda for the most part. I'm not talking about in war zones, I mean domestically, has been malicious. We need a team of Jedi that are able to tap into that same skill set and use the Force for good. And that's the book I'm writing. That's the proposal. And James Carville wrote an op-ed about this saying we need a mass communications campaign. And I'm like, I've been saying this for 10 years. We need this. We have people who can do it. The problem is getting funding because I'm like, so I'm working on banging on doors and being like, hey, we have people who've had tons of experience doing this. We have the skills. We know the playbook. We know the cheat codes. Let us use this for good. Like a lot of veterans, we want to continue to serve here at home. We don't want to see our own country become a war zone. That's the most soul-crushing thing. And that's something we refuse to accept defeat on. Like, I understand we can debate victory in Iraq. Victory here is non-negotiable. We don't want our country to fail. And we don't want to see, people of color afraid to walk the streets. We don't want to see corporations controlling the media. Like, we want to use our skills for good, not through the military, but as civilians, as citizens. Not Absolutely. Like Starship Troopers, where you got to be there's another, I won't go down that role, but
right. Service guarantees citizenship.
Yeah. Would you like to know more?
So, and I wonder what you think about this, John, because you obviously have your head deeply in this. Like, what I keep coming back to, and something that we've talked about in terms of the radical secular, is the idea of sort of like reigniting some sort of unifying sense of citizenship. When you talked about this idea of the masks and pitching it as, sure, no one's forcing you to do it, but it is something that you're doing for your fellow citizens, right? And what popped in my head right there was like the idea of citizenship, right? And civic responsibility. And like, I wonder how we sell that. I mean, certainly, there's certainly an argument to be made in terms of, for example, I'm using this as an example, it's came to my head just now. In the South, maybe you stop curriculums from teaching the sort of the lost cause narrative, which just fuels the idea of two different countries, right? And it's them and it's us.
Go ahead, John. I was going to say that, you've got really two completely different ideas of citizenship, and you see Trump appealing to that all the time. There are people who actually think that the monuments coming down or burning the flag or building affordable housing in the suburbs means that their way of life is under attack. And this is way beyond a dog whistle. This is just a dog foghorn. This is just completely. I use that term. It's one of my favorite terms because.
Or you can say a dog loudspeaker if you want to use psyop analogies. We have a giant loudspeaker in our Humvees that blasts for a long distance. Dog loudspeaker, maybe.
Well, the idea that suburbs are under attack, that these alternative policing policies, that affordable housing, that affordable health care, basic income, all of these things will destroy the suburbs because now those people are going to be moving into the suburbs. It's a huge block to a shared sense of citizenship that we've got, some people who are being appealed to in this way from the treasonous guy in the White House.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's two this has really torn me apart. I feel like there's two fundamentally different ideas of what makes America great. And when I say that, I realize America's never been great in every aspect. We're still far behind in certain aspects. I don't like totalizing language. I like to say America's great in some ways and still is really terrible and needs to catch up on others. But that aside, there's two different ideas of what makes America, or the idea of America, great. And the kind Sean just described is tribalism, a very tribal, identity-based, my inner circle, my in-group, versus dehumanizing the out-group. The other view, I think, is grounded in ideas, going back to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, and there are two undercurrents here, and tell me what you guys think. I've always defined them as two very broad axes. The moral axes or the axes are basically science and reason and facts and empiricism versus bullshit, dogma, and closed thinking. The other one is, because that's what carried our civilization to where it is the arc of scientific thinking and understanding and the whole Enlightenment, right? And the other one along with that is humanizing compassion and human dignity and the rights of the individual person. And I don't care what side you're on. If you're taken away from individual dignity, if you are oppressing the human person, you're wrong. I don't care if you're Mao Zedong, if you're right wing, left wing, I don't care what country you're from, what language you speak. If you are going against either of those axes, if you're promoting bullshit that goes against science or you're suppressing individual human rights, you're wrong. That's what makes America great. And by that, we can build a society, or to some degree have built a society that's very diverse, has a multitude of people coexisting under the umbrella of these ideas. There's still lots of problems and gaps, but that's the idea of America. But there's the other idea, the competing narrative, that is very, I call it sort of like a neo-Darwinian sort of tribalism of my in-group. These are two different ideas of what makes America great. And there's people that become conservatives for these two fundamentally different reasons. There are some intellectual conservatives that really do, whether you disagree with them or not, they're conservatives because of ideas and beliefs. There are others that are just conservative for emotional reasons of purism and tribalism and in-group, out-group. You know, they're very visceral, they're very emotional, they follow a platform, they resist change very instinctively, and they rapidly dehumanize a group that is considered outside their circle of inclusion. So they won't bat an eye. Some conservatives will say, we got to secure our borders and we might have to deport some people, but that breaks my heart. Like, I want everyone to be here. I know people that are Latino or whatever, and I hate to say it, but we might have to do this, but we should minimize it. We should minimize deportations. Whereas others celebrate deportations and don't even bat an eye when someone who's their entire life is ripped away from their family. That, I have no words for that. Like, you're American? Really? You're seriously? You're part of my super tribe? Fuck you, get out.
Seriously.
You know?
Well, this speaks really, because all three of us have read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and this really speaks to something that is key, and that is that a lot of people don't think that that the values of secularism, science, rationalism, the Enlightenment provides a lot of meaning. They look to number one, religion and God as their source of meaning, and that ties into their social group and their communities. And that ties into their larger tribalism, because it is. I don't think that you can really separate right now the evangelical Christian right from racism and white supremacy in the United States. I'm sorry to make that generalization, but it seems
it's a Venn diagram.
What?
It's a Venn diagram that's almost a circle. If you're talking about the extreme evangelicals.
Yeah,
great point.
So how do you're dealing with people who literally and I'm glad you brought up the compassionate conservatives who have human connections with immigrants and people of color and don't want to see these draconian policies. That's great. But there's another subset of these people who the idea of a multicultural society is just offensive to them. And not only is it offensive, they say multicultural societies don't work. They lack social cohesion. There's no way to establish common meaning. And we know that's false, because we actually have had a multicultural society in the United States for a very long time, and it has worked much better than it's working now. And the difference is the messaging coming from the top and from the right wing.
Yeah, well, I feel like they think that it's about framing. They think of multiculturalism as being devoid of any shared culture or any underlying values, and I agree that's not a good idea. I would say we are a nation of many cultures. We do have some core values and some core things that tie us together, but people they can identify proudly as Americans, and they can identify as wherever they're from and celebrate that through their music, through their cuisine, and they can fuse it together. And it could be a beautiful fusion of different cultures. It doesn't lack a core set of narratives and ideals. I've met some of the most patriotic Americans I know, people I'd sooner drink a beer with than most anyone, are people from the Middle East, from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, from countries like that. They value freedom more than the vast majority of white Americans I've ever met, aside from like your special operations or your military, right? Like, a lot of immigrants are the most freedom-loving people you'll ever meet, from all countries, right? And so there is a shared set of values and cohesion. There is an overarching narrative for America, but there's also a lot of diverse cultures, and a lot of places see different music and food and stories and history. That's awesome. And I think communicating it that way might be helpful. It's like, yeah, no, we're not devoid of culture. There is American culture, but there's many American cultures. And exist under a single narrative, and we need to try to make that narrative more true by fighting for equality. That would be my,
I think that's right. I think that's, and I'm like, as I'm hearing you guys talk, there is clearly a competing ideas of what America is, what America stands for. And it's no secret, right? Because clearly, right, New York City is right over there. You're in it right now. And there is a multicultural thing going on there, right? But everyone also identifies as New Yorkers. And there's a whole idea of what a New Yorker is, right? And that includes, like, the most diverse borough, Queens, right? That includes the wealthy people in Manhattan. That includes the poor Black people in up in the Bronx. Like they're all New York. They all have very different cultures, but they're all New York. And so that is something that's attainable. The question is, how do we attain that? And so what comes, like, the fundamental barriers that I see to that are, and I mentioned this earlier, this sort of the narrative of the rebel narrative, the rural versus urban narrative, right? So, and I think we have to end up getting down to, like, the nitty gritty, and frankly, at the school board level, of changing how kids are sort of indoctrinated into, because, right, that is where you learn how to become a citizen, right? Yeah. That's where you learn civics. And if you learned back then that the South was a states' rights issue, that the Civil War was a states' rights issue, right? And that the Northern people are a bunch of aggressors and elites. I mean, that feeds right into a narrative that you grow up. And by the way, you're much likely not to go to college. You're most likely not to go to graduate school. So you're not going to get that exposure. You're going to stay in that small town, work at a gas station, and then the problem continues to put up. I'm
from Georgia. I grew up in Atlanta, but I also went to high school in the countryside. I can interchange my accent across a range of very gentlemanly ways of talking, whether we're talking about Savannah, Georgia, of Kevin Spacey and House of Cards, or we're like, hey, you tell me what, motherfucker, you try to come for my guns, I got something for you. I don't want no more Barack Hussein Obama. So I understand the South. We need to counter that narrative that you just described. We need to counter that narrative in a grassroots way in the South. And there are ways to do that. There really are. And most liberals, y'all are exceptions. Most liberals have no clue how to do that. And that's understandable. But there are ways to do it. But you're right. Speaking as a Southerner, the idea that Southern identity and pride and meaning has to be anchored to the Confederacy is complete bullshit. The Confederacy has a shorter shelf life than fucking Glee or one of those fucking shows.
This is brilliant, though. This is actually brilliant from the standpoint of the Trump campaign, right? Because what they've done is they've taken the places in the country where you've got successful multiculturalism, you've got, widespread public education in the big cities, and you got people who accept a more shared notion of America, who understand what the Civil War was about slavery, who aren't into this whole lost cause thing. And they've now split them up. They're driving a wedge in between these two worlds. And the parts of America that are supportive of Trump are largely the parts that are still majority white. Some of these towns, you might, I think what is the African-American population is 12% of the country, but in some of these rural counties, it might be 1% or even less.
Like almost zero.
Almost zero. So, it's a really good strategy if you are trying to become the last president of the Confederacy or the next president of the Confederacy, is to not only to drive this wedge, but also to defund, condemn, and disparage the cities and these places where people are living together, because that is expressly against what the Confederacy stood for.
The funny thing is, more people, like I said, if there's something about New York that all Americans can identify with, no matter what culture we're from. If the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes walking through our city, we're all New Yorkers and we're all Americans. And average New Yorkers, I'm serious, average fucking
New Yorkers. You're right.
Yeah, no, we are one of the most patriotic cities in the world. We are, like, New Yorkers are, yes, I say we, I'm an adopted New Yorker. I moved here after Afghanistan. I've been here about 8 years, but there's a lot of assholes here. I get it. I'm an asshole whenever I'm riding the subway, and I don't want to listen to people. Other than that, I'm a nice guy. But the point is, there's old school New Yorkers that were born and raised here have more in common with conservative heartland Americans when it comes to certain things. When they talk about taxes, the taxes here are oppressive. And if liberals and conservatives agree on this, the taxes here for the working class are terrible. The corruption is terrible. There's so many problems. And if you were having a conversation with a New Yorker and you turn their accent into you went from like my cousin Vinny to talking like a good old boy down south in Georgia somewhere. If you just interchange the accent and had a conversation with a New Yorker and you're a hardcore conservative from Georgia, you would think he's part of your tribe. You would think he's one of you. There's so much shared concerns and frustrations they have. So this idea that New York is like an elite liberal progressive, it is liberal, very socially liberal. We have the Go Topless parade. Guys and girls walk with no shirt on. I've done this for purely altruistic reasons. And by the way, like we are very socially liberal, right? But when it comes to like taxes, we're angry. We're like, screw
absolutely.
You know? So,
or Bill de Blasio. Everybody hates Bill de Blasio. Right?
I mean, I'm thinking of like, and I've been so busy, I've never even paid attention to all that. But yeah, you're right. Like we need to get more New Yorkers talking to, people down south. They drink a beer together any day of the week. Most Americans are not this divided on most things. If they just
that's right.
Like the way we're talking now, as a backstory to listeners, Sean and I have had years of like friendly frenemy arguing and
heated discussions on Facebook.
Yeah. As soon as I saw your face and saw you talking and on a video, I had zero negative emotion, zero anxiety, zero nothing. I'm like, oh, cool. I could smoke a joint with this guy if I wasn't still in the Army Reserves, you know? Not that I've ever done any drugs in my life, of course.
No.
Never. But
never.
So that kind of humanizing conversation needs to happen to break down those stereotypes. That to me is counter propaganda. That is a way to develop a counter narrative. And I think like the Lincoln Project or the compilation of ex-Trump voters is a way to take people from these different tribes and have them talk to each other, have them give their testimonies to put a face to it.
You know what would happen? I think organically, if Americans were just able to have these conversations independently, over time, this polarization would flatten out. It would soften. It would become more muted. But we have these the incitement occurring on a daily basis. Every Tucker Carlson episode, every Laura Ingraham episode, every Sean Hannity episode, Rush Limbaugh, all these people, and that's not even to talk about the lunatics on the alt-right. They are inciting this war constantly, and you hear this all the time. I mean, this thing that I brought up about multicultural societies don't work is a big, huge talking point, and what they're basically saying is that this isn't a failure. It's like, you shouldn't even try. We haven't tried and failed. We should just not try. We should, separate. The countries of the world should be separate nations. People should go to their own corners, and that's how we should live. And that's, it's a prescription for failure, but this is what people are being told on a daily basis.
I think that's really a critical point, especially I think we can't talk enough about the role of media in general, but particularly conservative media, right? And because like guys like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and what was the real asshole before on Fox? I can't remember his name now, but
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly, I mean, the king of all assholes, but like, right, but those guys, they make a ton of money, and I get that, and that's a lot of why they do it. But they're also just like big-headed egoists, right, and just pieces of garbage. But what they're doing every day is real damage, and the thrust behind it ultimately is capitalism, right? Like ultimately, it's money, right? Because that's why Fox News exists, right? They know that just like you're saying, John, they know exactly how to tap into the emotional brain. Like that is their entire business model, right? So the question is like, and this goes to your point earlier, Sean, the importance of having the stick in terms of making sure that can we perhaps from a governmental perspective tamp down some of that sort of, the fairness doctrine, right? These sort of ideas that used to exist in media. Is that something we can marshal to try and tamp down some of that negative impact, I wonder?
I wish that was the case. I mean, you get immediately into the free speech conversation, which is just goes nowhere, because there's not a single person who supports free speech who doesn't have some idea of some kind of speech that they don't want out there.
Yeah.
There's not one person, and anybody who says that they want absolutely free speech is a hypocrite.
Right. There's no absolutist. You're right. There's no,
So it just seems like, the probably most destructive thing is the blurring of news and entertainment, because these commentaries, would have been previously relegated to opinion section, or whatever, labeled as commentary. But now these commentary shows are on Fox News, and they're some of the most popular shows. The Fox News program is fairly factual. It's all these other opinion shows and their website that really take them over into the realm of destructive propaganda.
I think that's right. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say it's like a funnel where there's algorithms that will filter you beliefs you want to hear and expose you to things you want, a steady diet of things you want to hear, and then they'll funnel you through similar content. So you go from whatever you're watching to Breitbart to it exposes you to a false universe, this moral matrix of like disproportionately exposing you to fringes. So if you're like a conservative or just anyone, you're going to see the most crazy examples of extreme feminism, or like a fake Russian troll video of a woman pouring bleach on men, saying this is what feminists are. Well, are there some feminists that do that? Yeah, like a very tiny microscopic percentage. This was Russian propaganda. It was fake news. But when you're constantly filtered that content, you're funneled into this false universe. So a chapter in my book is called The Green Pill. It's not red pill, blue pill. The green pill is about creating a space where we can talk to people in a healthy way and debunk bullshit. If you're a conservative, talk to other conservatives, but they can steer you out of the rabbit hole and have a reasonable conversation. And that's anyway, that's all I was going to say. I didn't want to
Oh, no, not at all. I think that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like you're doing I can't wait for this book. I mean, it sounds like right up my alley, because
I need to war game it. I need to run some of it by you guys, because I strengthen my own views by hearing criticism. It's that whole OODA loop. So Sean over the years has had good, and a lot of people on the left and to some degree other, shades have helped me refine my views, because for the most part, and I have ego, I'm not perfect, but for the most part, if I'm wrong, I'll be like, yeah, I changed my mind.
Absolutely.
That should be the new sexy and cool. That's
trying to get to truth. I have these arguments with people all the time. This idea of no, I don't want to win this argument. I want to get closer to the truth. Well, of course I have ego, and of course part of me just wants to win. But ultimately, if you tell me something, and especially if I react strongly to it, odds are I'm going to leave that conversation and think about it. Yeah. And then I'll be like, wait a second, you know what? Fuck, I really got to change this. I got to tweak my views a little bit on this sort of issue. Yeah.
Let me ask you guys, have you guys ever had people on the right or the center or the left that have, come back to one of these spaces on social media after they're dogpiled and said, you know what, guys, I was wrong on this thing. And hopefully when that happens, they'll get embraced with open arms of all right, hey, cool. Glad you changed your mind. Let's continue to talk, instead of being yeah, you were wrong. You suck. That will guide people further down the rabbit hole.
This is something, first of all, generally no. People change their minds in private and they don't change their minds in public. But there's also, I've been having this conversation with some of my friends on the left about this, because some of the Never Trumpers, the Lincoln Project has been criticized, from the left, and some of the Never Trumpers have been criticized. It's well, this is all your fault. You guys voted this guy in. What the fuck's wrong with you? How do you want us to forgive you now? No way. And I've just been saying, hey, repentance is always welcome. And the word repentance is not a religious term. It just means rethinking your position.
Yeah. If these people were neuron for neuron, not to go into free will, but if these people were hardwired with the same upbringing and the same brain, they would also be the same people. People don't have the free will they think they do. Have some goddamn humility and be more compassionate. You're not that good. If you were born in 1850, you would probably be silent on lynchings. Most people.
Yes. Oh my God. You're nailing it.
Yeah. These pseudo woke motherfuckers, I'm all about being woke for real, but have some humility. Realize you are woke because of the sacrifices and the ideas that came before you. And you happen to be lucky enough to be born into the age of fucking TikTok. So get off your arrogant ass and have some humility and learn. And my thing about teaching civics and critical thinking in public schools, K through 12, I understand
so important.
We need I don't want revisionist history. I don't want ideological history.
Exactly.
I just want history. I want the good, bad, and the ugly. I want all of it. I don't want left or right indoctrination. Just give us everything. And
there's one way that woke people, like you said, that's a very interesting point about people, being silent on lynching, because that was just the background of noise of the way things work. Well, we have a similar situation going on today, and all of us need to be humble, because For example, we all use products that come from places that have slave labor. We all eat food that is being picked by people who are making $2 an hour, if they're lucky, living in shacks, that they come here, migrant workers, they come here and they're in horrible conditions. I mean, conditions it's practically like a prison camp, right? And we're eating that produce every day. So, there's embodied slavery, there's embodied oppression and embodied murder in so much of commerce in the world, and it's like, this is not to make people feel bad about going to the grocery store, not at all. What I'm just saying is that when you have such systemic issues, there's a tendency in the human mind to suppress to distance oneself from the actual consequences. That when you pull out your dollars, and you put down your dollars on a table, those dollars funnel into the system that causes oppression.
Right.
This is so important, man. This is such an important issue because it's about society evolving, right, and sort of evolving over time, right? So I think about I've had conversations with people because I talk to people about race a lot, and white people today no one wants to think of themselves as a racist, right? No one ever thought of themselves as a racist, right? Like everyone thinks they're not, and they really aren't, certainly but like I look back to say the 90s, right? When I grew up in an environment where I was the only black person, right? And in the 90s, and the things that I heard in the 90s are just not acceptable today, right? Like, right. And I look back at them now and I say to myself, like, how was I okay with that? Right? And then, like, how are my close friends okay with that? Mm-hmm. And I'm all and okay because we evolve, but the denial is what kills me. Like the idea that, like, oh no, I'm not, like, racism as a moral failing, as opposed to something that you're just not, a personal moral failing, as opposed to a systemic problem that gets better over time, but the new problems come to the front, to the fore over time as well. And we have to be willing to confront those as they come up, adjust our views, as we've been saying over and over again throughout this conversation.
It's a question of psychology. How do we frame this in a way that people are not going to be resistant? Where they're going to be resistant, it's going to be painful, but how do you reframe it? And how do you understand why they're so resistant? Well, for a lot of people, it's an issue of, like, the word white fragility is really a pseudo-scientific word. I understand the word. I get, what it is. It's real. But what it really is, for the most part, is cognitive dissonance.
Absolutely.
The average person doesn't need to know all the lingo, but we have to ground this in some empirical analysis. Why are people resistive? How do we change their minds? And I think for a lot of people, a lot of white people, it's a matter of, it's an anxiety and a fear. And for people on the left too, it's anxiety and fear. They're so scared of being bigots. If you're a leftist, you're going to lash out and join one of these cancel mobs for the wrong reasons. And if you're not a leftist, your anxiety is going to get you to double down and be a denier of white fragility or white supremacy, right?
Exactly.
And it's a mental health psychology issue. Consult the science books, and then you can deliver your message and you can incorporate the social justice stuff. But the framework should be understanding the human mind. It starts and stops with psychology. Yeah. Exactly. And I can, I'm a bad example. Like, I don't give a shit. The idea of white guilt or white pride to me is fucking stupid. But for a lot of people, it's real. And I get that. We have to understand why people feel anxiety, why they feel this way. For a lot of people, when they hear racism, they think, hood wearers.
Exactly.
They don't know the terminology. Of course they're going to resist that. That's not white fragility. That's just like misunderstanding. Then if you explain to them, no, it's what we mean by racism is that everyone's born with certain biases, and you've often been part of the system. You're benefiting from it. You've had biases. It's okay to have that. It's okay.
Exactly. It's okay. That's what I want to say. I want to be like, it's okay.
Yeah. Just recognize it. It's not personal, man.
Yeah.
But they're with those toxic people on Twitter that saturate the message. So all they see are the toxic voices, but that's a small percentage. So they're not hearing you guys. And if they were exposed to more of you guys, they'd be open to it. And that's where we need to create the green pill spaces, the exchange spaces, where they can really hear that message. That's how you draw people out of Gavin McInnes's Batcave and the fucking pipeline.
Well, I try to reframe this because, I've been accused, anytime I get on with anybody who's conservative at all and I start talking about race, they're like, oh, you have your white liberal guilt and you're just as much of a problem. You went to university, you're elite, this doesn't affect you. You're a hypocrite, blah, blah, blah. I say, no, I don't have to apologize at all for my whiteness. Okay. I don't feel bad about it. I'm not guilty. What I am is embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that people who look like me, people who I'm going to be judged by their actions, because white people are judged as a race, just like any other race is judged. Right. So I'm going to be judged for the actions of white racists who, from the Karens all the way on down, to videos and everything else like that. It's like somebody sees me walking down the street and they're going to think that's the way I feel. And I don't feel that way. And that's embarrassing.
Right.
Yeah. Sean, I just want to say, if I was a Homeland Security guy and I saw you and your military haircut and your glasses, I would immediately have a flashback to Falling Down with Michael Douglas, and I would detain you very quickly. So don't feel too bad. I would profile you just like everyone else. I'm kidding. Like, I'm serious, man. You look like, I was thinking like Tim Robbins from fucking that Jeff Bridges movie, The Terrorist, Arlington Road or something. I'm fucking with you.
Yeah,
but no, seriously,
no. I mean, but I get it. Like, right, everybody draws conclusions when they see, somebody.
Yeah.
If I took my glasses off, suddenly I have a totally different look, right?
Yeah.
Wearing glasses, you appear, people think that you're educated or more educated or whatever. There's a stereotype there, So get back on, and all of a sudden I'm a glasses wearing, intellectual, liberal, elite, whatever,
Right.
So,
you mentioned this, we've been talking about this a lot, but I think it's really, really important. And I try to talk about this. Like, a friend of mine, won't mention his name, is like going through like a lot of difficulty with depression and with some drugs and stuff like that. And as a person, I mean, and I'm very open to say that I've done drugs before, but and in fact have done too many drugs before, and I'm a person who's had to like redo my life more than once, right? And the thing that's really changed my life more than anything else is learning how my mind works, right? Learning that sort of the basic sort of evolutionary psychology and why I do what I do, and of course reasoning, just sort of learn like critical reasoning. And that is what is just so lost. And so when you get like a fragile white person or whatever, I want to grab them and be like, look, man, like most of what you're doing is automatic anyway. So like the idea that most of what you do every day is automatic and you have no choice in the matter. So like, stop taking yourself so goddamn seriously. It's okay that you have biases.
Yeah.
Stop trying to pretend you don't, because that's the problem, right? It's not the biases that are the problem. If we understand what the biases are, then we can actually start to work with those and we can green pill this situation, right? We can green pill this. We can come up with real solutions. But if we're still in this denial of this idea that like the Ku Klux Klan is what racism is, then we will get nowhere. And not even just racism, on any topic that includes human biases, which of course is every.
That's beautiful, man. I on a personal level, like on a personal note, I came to that deeper feeling when I was in Afghanistan, and I saw some of the most horrific acts of barbarism coinciding with one of the most beautiful cultures and people I've ever met. The most hospitable, honorable people, alongside some of the most dishonorable things I've ever seen. And it took me like 6 months, even as someone who understood culture and anthropology in Afghanistan, who was well trained and spoke some Farsi and some Pashto, it still took me months to really resolve some of this. And evolutionary psychology, in the most pure sense, made me understood there's a common thread of humanity, and there's unconscious survival reasoning that ties us together as humans and that makes us human. That was so edifying and beautiful, and that to me was like a big burden being lifted. That showed that between a suicide bomber and a suburban housewife and a or a suburban racist or whoever, there's so much commonalities that drive behaviors. Beneath the veil of cultural differences, we're all human, and this allows us to be more humble. If we were in if I was born in the villages I've been to in the AfPak border, I would probably be acting just like them. I'd be hustling for weapons, smuggling opium to survive. I'd be worried that my son or daughter couldn't afford to get married. I'd lose face. I'd be tempted to go plant that IED. As bad as that is, if you were them, you would probably be feeling the same way they feel.
Exactly.
And evolution, that pure understanding of human behavior, apart from the bullshit versions of it, but the real understanding of human behavior strips this down and is so edifying and beautiful. And it's like a sobering way to realize why people are the way they are. Like, you listen to Daryl Davis's talk on de-radicalizing Klansmen. After a few conversations, some of these people, they start the process of de-radicalizing. I'm like, that's amazing.
Unbelievable.
Really is.
Well, and that emphasis on culture,
Yeah.
Everybody is oriented toward culture, and very few people are oriented towards the essential human elements. What I really liked was in the back of the blank slate, I believe, if I remember correctly, there is a list of human universals. It talks about behaviors that are common to every culture. And it's exactly speaking to what you're saying, is that, the tribal honor of a guy who, is worried that he can't afford to pay for the wedding, is very similar to the tribal honor of somebody, who is a white person who is afraid of losing their privileged position in society. It's like they're seeing something where, they're going to lose face, and losing face is directly tied in with the fitness for reproduction, right? Because if you're embarrassed, if somebody is insulting you, or this is why people they fight if they're insulted, because it's decreasing their reputation and their ability, therefore, to reproduce. So it becomes very, very highly tied in with our survival instinct.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's
absolutely
so true. Wow. Yeah, this is great. This is a great conversation. Go ahead.
Well, it's like the example, a funny example is like if you're in Applebee's and you see, Joan Rambo and her army of Karen rebels walk in, and you're like, oh, fuck, but at the same time, maybe they're just a bunch of old middle-aged white women, and maybe they're not Karens. I've met women that look like a Karen, but they're like the anti-Karen. I'm like, that's awesome. But if you stereotype her as a Karen, she might turn into one because of the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like the Othello in behavioral deception, when the FBI teaches these techniques, which were also useful in war zones. When like a suspect is being interrogated, or if you're talking to someone out in the mountains of whatever, and you look at them like they're guilty, they're going to act guilty. This is a big thing with police reform. If you're like, hey, son, what are you doing walking around? And you use the word son, and it's a black 16-year-old, and he's been given the talk, he's gonna look guilty because he's automatically thinking this is how he's seeing me. And by trying not to look that way, he's going to look that way. So if you're like stereotyped as somebody, you're going to start to look, you're going to be apprehensive, and they're going to see that as confirmation that you're guilty. And this causes a vicious cycle, whether it's, people on Twitter, if someone comes out with a camera, once again, I'm all about exposing people with a camera if they're really like the real racist. Absolutely. The iPhone is a good weapon. But like, we need to make sure it's not, they're not, reacting to by being afraid that they're being stereotyped. We need to give people the space to explain themselves. And, we need to separate people that are not real Karens from actual Karens and identify the behavior and say, look, if you are a Karen, we're not trying to ruin your life. Just self-examine and try to like not be this person, man.
Right. That's the key of behavior, and the fact is that only the bad videos go viral. So nobody who's not behaving badly has to worry about a camera, right? That goes for cops, that goes for citizens or whatever. If you're not behaving badly, what's your issue? There may be exceptions to that rule, but overall, I agree. I mean, if there are exceptions to that rule, I think we have a responsibility to say, hey, this was a false, it's like stolen valor. Most stolen valor videos are real. Most of the time when veterans, and they always hold the camera fucking the wrong way, but beyond that, they usually, they out the fucking, these are so funny. Sometimes these people have mental health issues, and I feel bad that they're, on camera. They think they're CIA jet pilot, Navy SEAL. I'm like, that guy has mental health issues. But some are just trying to get laid and get a free cup of coffee, whatever. Most of those videos, they're real stolen valor people. Occasionally they'll misfire, but as soon as that happens, the veterans community will say, that was a mistake, bad move. Right. We redact this person's fine. Everything's cool. That should happen with cancel culture. It's like, hey, if there's a misfire, just own it. Like that girl. Exactly. This girl working at Chipotle. And to my best of my knowledge, it turned out she was not in the wrong. She almost had her life ruined. Then they published an article saying actually she was not wrong, and now she's okay. That needs to be the process. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't ever. It's unavoidable. Like, people are going to be exposed.
People are going to, exactly.
Just got to figure out a way to make it work.
Something that you said earlier, John, that really resonated with me, and I think it might be an interesting transition here, and that is, you mentioned, if I were if you were in Afghanistan, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in a tiny village, blah, 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 you like, and all the reasons that you mentioned, a suicide, like planting an IED might seem like a good idea. Now, and I think similarly about this all the time in terms of people of color in poor neighborhoods, selling drugs, doing drugs, just generally behaving in a way that is not sort of mainstream, whatever that might be, right? There's a lot of different ways, but I found especially, again, I frequently draw on my experience growing up, just because it was such a I don't know, visceral experience in terms of being the only person of color in my environment, like really the only one in my environment. So, so I remember listening to how people talked about those ghetto people, right? And like all this sort of like this terminology and even at that time, I think I even would pile on in some extent. But now when I look at this, it's like, well, this is, if I were in that environment, if I had the same neurons, right? If I had grown up in that level of poverty, right? How would I be behaving? And this goes into like, Sean knows how I, go on the just world fallacy kick. My personal blog is called the Just Words Fallacy, because I think I think it's so critical. Because I think that's such a critical issue here, right? Because like, right on the right, particularly on the right, but also on the left, this idea that like, right, that everyone is where they should be because of their behavior or because of what and that if I were in that situation, I would be different, right? And I think that is a lie. And I think this is a good segue because of the rioting. Why do they burn down their own neighborhoods, right? That's something that they say on the right all the time. And again, how do I know how I would behave if I were in that situation? And, and I think it's an interesting maybe segue into the Portland debacle, but go ahead.
Well, I've been working. So when I got back from Afghanistan, I started working with the Red Hook community after Hurricane Sandy. Red Hook, Brooklyn is a beautiful neighborhood on the waterfront, Valentino Pier, Statue of Liberty. It's partly split between a up and coming area. I'd say predominantly white, but it's a little more affluent area, and then there's predominantly Black and Latino housing projects, and it's got a lot of history across different Italian, Irish, and also Black and Hispanic. But it basically is divided between two halves, and it has a lot of crossover. It's a beautiful neighborhood; people know each other. But when I started getting involved there, doing my project of like mapping the neighborhood and using my skills from overseas with civil affairs type stuff, mapping villages, I would work with the community and try to identify their own voices and give them a platform to like put their concerns into a greater map of the neighborhood. And in doing this, the first like few months was me. This is when I really learned what it means to be, if people use the word ally, that word gets thrown around so much. It's annoying. But basically I had to learn this. It involves shutting up and listening. Really does, honestly. First few months was mostly I'd explain what I do. Beyond that, I would only way I would ever win anyone's trust is by listening to them and really listening and being humble. And in doing that, I learned the very thing you're saying. Like I've had friends that have lived through the crack epidemic. When Red Hook was so dangerous, it was like La Perla in Puerto Rico, but even worse. I mean, it was like I'd be more safe dropping me off anywhere in Afghanistan than Red Hook used to be in the 70s. There's only one way in and out, or you're fucked if you're there after a certain hour. And these people lived through that. I had a buddy, a guy named Wally, really good friend of mine, lived through Vietnam veteran. Obviously he was Black and he grew up there, or at least he lived through so much of this. And him and a bunch of other people told me a lot about this. And he mentioned after Martin Luther King was assassinated, people wanted to burn down their neighborhood, but they didn't. People were responsible enough to say, they essentially said, no, we're not going to do this. But it takes exceptional acts of, average people, regardless of skin color. If you're in certain conditions, you're going to do terrible things. It doesn't mean it's good. I'm against all forms of burning down a neighborhood, rioting. That's bad. But I've seen this all over the world. These are average people doing bad things, not because they're bad, but because they're in extraordinary circumstances. People don't understand that. They think only bad people are racist, or only bad people will burn down their neighborhood. They're average people. Most Nazis were ordinary people. Guess what? Your ordinary woke ass probably would have been a Nazi. wenn du in Deutschland in von der Zweiten Weltkrieg Deutsch gesprochen hast, würdest du eine Nazi sein? So some German, you know, like if you were a freaking German, you would have been like on the wrong side of an Indiana Jones movie. I'm sorry to say it. Don't take it personally. It's human nature.
The wrong side of a human Indiana Jones movie.
The Ark of the Covenant would have come for your ass, right? I mean, come on.
This goes back a little bit to the conversation you and I were having, John, on Facebook, and that has to do with the various types of messaging. And I maintain that regardless of how we feel about rioting or burning down your own neighborhood, whatever it is, that rioting is essentially a message. You know, it's a message to the leadership of society, whatever you want to call it. You know, whether it's government, whether it's corporate, whatever it is, it's like, this is not acceptable. We're not putting up with this. And I think that messaging can coexist with, saner, more rational discourse. And, you know, I think my main objection, I don't disagree with anything you're saying in terms of counterinsurgency and all the work that you've done, which sounds amazing. And I want to know more about it and I want to read the book. Okay, but I don't think that there's necessarily a contradiction between, parliamentary politics, electoral politics, and on the other hand, when it comes time where there's a conflagration that takes place based on a George Floyd or a Rodney King or whatever the situation is, that's a message that is a part of the conversation. And it's like, even though there are many groups who go out there in the street with full intentions of protesting peacefully, you're going to get 1%. All it takes are these seeds of violence. You know, somebody comes out with a hammer, breaks a window, somebody else sets a fire, and pretty soon the streets are everything's ablaze. So how do you, I mean, don't you think that there's a sort of coexistence between these various methods of protest?
Yeah, that's an incredibly interesting question. I've been over the last 2 months have been deeply pondering, and after Ferguson was what really got me thinking about that. Because basically from a counterinsurgency perspective, you have to recognize that the only reliable way to set conditions to prevent this kind of instability and violence is to address root concerns, address the grievances. All the militarized responses in the world, if you roll into these different cities with Stryker vehicles and the National Guard is competent, you know, our military is trained as they are. We're not, I guarantee you, I'm one of, like, most soldiers are not going to understand how to operate in an American city. They're not trained to. It's not their fault. It's going to be very messy and very difficult. Watch the movie The Siege with Denzel and Bruce Willis. So our military is not equipped.
That's a good one, that movie.
It is, absolutely. I quote a lot of it word for word. It's fucking amazing. But we're operate in American cities this way. So here's the thing. We use the analogy called whack-a-mole. So we learn from our mistakes. If you're listening to this and you're one of our leaders, and yes, I understand we need a National Guard. We need to respond and sometimes put down violence. But you want to avoid militarized responses as much as possible. Even if you put down an insurgency or an uprising in one city, it's going to go viral and it's going to materialize in another city. And you're going to play a game we've played for years in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's called whack-a-mole. It doesn't fucking work. You will lose. I promise you. I don't care how tough-talking you are as a politician. You will lose this game. We are better at this than you are. Don't fucking try it. If we can't do it, you can't do it.
Yeah.
That's my message.
And the whack-a-mole thing also works through time, right? Because if you can basically suppress a riot. You can go in there with cops. You can arrest everybody. You can throw them all. You can charge them with felonies if you want to. Put them away for 10 years. I mean, this is this type of thing that's being talked about. But all that does is set you up for the next riot because you didn't solve the problem.
We have like 20 years of this playbook. So within the military, we have like all the cheat codes. We have like the Center for Army Lessons Learned. It's called CALL, C-A-L-L. We share this stuff fluidly. Same thing police need to do. We share this information. We have volumes of freaking books on this. In fact, I'll grab one right now. Stuff like this right here. Center for Army Lessons Learned. There you go. We study this stuff. We have literally Harry Potter style libraries of this shit. Instead of magic, we specialize in counterinsurgency. We are the wizards of it. And we learn from our mistakes. And yet our political leaders don't seem to have any knowledge or understanding of this.
Half of them don't read. They wouldn't read. That would mean nothing to them. And even if they did read, you've got the people who are the experts, and we're living in a very anti-expert time politically.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we don't, you know, lessons learned, no, just crush it. You know, that's basically.
Right. Well, I would say this too. Like, I understand. So, you know, Martin Luther King said, you know, I know a lot of people, especially a lot of white people, will quote MLK for their own agenda. I try really hard not to do that. But I've studied his quote on riots. He said very clearly and unmistakably, riots are bad, but they happen for a reason. They're the voice of the unheard. You need to listen, and if you don't, you're foolish and you're making a big mistake. That is unmistakably what he said. And I 100% agree with that. And the thing is, here's my thing. I don't like riots, obviously. I think destroying small business in particular is terrible. But I can't stop it we're not going to stop it from, you know, denouncing it isn't going to stop from happening. If people are going to do it, at least use just war theory. At least use, you know, like rules of engagement, like in war. If a lot of people on the far left say, well, it's war, rioting works. They've read, you know, a lot of these far left people, no offense, they take Mark Bray's book to the bathroom and the pages are stuck together. They fucking love that guy. They're like, Mark Bray. I'm like, I get it. You believe, you know, but if you're
I like Mark Bray's book too. I think his book is amazing.
I know, but I think if you're going to do, if people are going to riot, use rules of engagement. Don't mistake the small mom and pop shop for the target. Like, come on. But
it's almost like, but here's what happens is that ends up being the destruction of mom and pop businesses, okay, and the destruction of their own neighborhoods becomes a way of being against change. Like, nobody's going to say, oh, you know, we want cops to keep choking out black people, okay, but they are going to say things like, don't destroy mom and pop businesses. Right. You know, don't riot. And so it becomes a proxy. It becomes another one of these dog whistles or dog foghorns to basically oppose all social change.
This is something I've learned over the last 2 weeks, or I'd say like 6 weeks. I've lost count. We're all in lockdown. I've lost fucking count over the last however long since the Floyd riots. Something I've learned, and I've changed my mind on this. You know, I think there should be a way to distinguish yourself from some of the most violent acts and say, look, the protests and the things we're supporting don't tie us to the violent, like, don't associate us with the fringe. But we need to make clear, if we're going to have that message, we need to understand better and worse ways to do that. And one big point that you made, and I agree with this, is most of the people complaining about the riots were silent on the police brutality, and that's a problem. It's not that we can't criticize destroying small businesses, but we got to realize when we do, we need to make it clear we're also against, you know, in fact, we're primarily against the systemic problem that led to the upheaval in the first place. Like, we are primary objective, address root causes, primary goal, acknowledge the systemic problems with policing, humanize people of color. That is the far more important. That is the overwhelming objective. In doing that, yeah, of course we can say smashing a small business is bad, but the messaging needs to be careful that it avoids that double standard. And I still don't have all the answers to that.
Yeah,
I think there's a great. I'm sitting here listening to you guys talk about this, and I've seen you guys discuss this online as well. So,
I'm sorry, man. I'm kidding.
No, I know. So I mean, you know, and so I'm coming at it I think with a relatively open mind. I do think. I'm hearing you. Clearly, the riot is the language of the unheard. I mean, that I think we're all agreed on. I think, but I tend to, but I think you guys are both right. I hate to split the baby because I think that's lazy, but I do think you're both right. I mean, I think, Sean, your point is that, like, right, first of all, like, it's not like the riots are planned, right? Like, they just sort of spontaneously happen. So you can't sort of like strategically use a riot, right? You know, so, and that goes into what you're saying, John, is that, like, so you have to then frame it in a way that is useful on the back end. So, but I do think, though, but I agree with you, Sean, that, like, condemning the riot is important, but at the same time, like, it does. It does convey a really, really important message. So I'm hesitant to say, like, riots are bad. I mean, they are bad, right? So it becomes this very complicated issue. That's why I like to say that you guys
are
both right.
Here's where I'm coming from. You get 1,000 or 2,000 people in the street. I don't care how well organized you are, unless you actually have, like, security, unless you have your own security, you know, who's going to go through and do what John does in other parts of the world and identify the troublemakers and be literally like there with a sniper, or someone, to just otherwise you can't shut down the violence because all it takes is one person and everybody else joins in. So
even us, I've dealt with riots. I've been in full body armor in 120-degree heat, speaking Arabic with people trying to calm down. Sometimes our techniques work. Once it reaches a critical mass, you're not stopping that riot. You're fucked.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
So that's why I think that the condemnation of riots, it's like, that gets directed at it gets directed at Democrats, it gets directed at Black Lives Matter, it gets directed at any social justice group that somehow we're advocating riots. It's like, no, we're basically my position is that constantly gets mischaracterized is that we have to tolerate this if we want change. We have to tolerate a certain amount of collateral damage. I hate to use a fucking George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld term. It is collateral damage.
It's true. I hate to say it, it's true. Collateral damage is necessary. We try to minimize it, but no, it's a real thing, man. We deal with it all the time.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is that you guys aren't saying anything that's that different from each other. It sounds like, because John, I keep hearing you talk about framing, and I like psychology too. Framing is just, critical. It depends on it sort of is how we think about things, and so it's the basis upon from which we sort of make our deductions. I think there needs to be better messaging from Democrats. I think that I think that on the left, there has to be better messaging about riots. I'm not trying to say exactly I know what that messaging is, but I do agree that first of all, discounting them is not important or not worth denouncing. I think is a bad idea. I think Joe Biden, for example, coming out there, he's the guy who his entire job is just to get elected, right? So he has to come out there and say no, I denounce the riots, and I think that's good messaging, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a whole world of activists out there who are saying the opposite thing, which is just burn the whole fucking thing down, right? And maybe that's not useful. Maybe I understand the anger, right?
Sure. Sometimes in my heart, in my actual heart, I feel that stuff needs to be burned down because I feel that, even though I'm not the one generally who's the victim of this oppression. Okay.
Right.
I've been very privileged and, I acknowledge all of that, but it seems to me that, when I see this, it's my embarrassment, my compassion, all these things are I'm just tired of it. This has been going on basically my entire life. Mm-hmm. I've been observing these things not changing, and getting worse. And, the things that Donald Trump's saying, and it's well, fucking burn it down then. If white people aren't going to listen, what?
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's a natural human instinct, absolutely. And I've seen, like I said, all over the world, when people are pushed so far, there is a blowback. That's a fact of human nature and social, and it's a fact of geopolitics. What's so weird to me is we have 2 decades of very pinpoint war fighting abroad after 9/11. Most of which involves population dynamics and understanding populations. We've applied none of that here to our backyard.
Yeah,
what the fucking Jesus Zeus's butthole is the disconnect?
Well, it's kind of like we spent
rock when I said that, but yeah, what is the disconnect?
We spent billions of dollars, potentially maybe even trillions, I don't know, rebuilding Iraq's infrastructure after we bombed it. And we have not rebuilt our own infrastructure. It's the same thing. It's our own country.
That'll make us safer.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about defund the police? Because I feel like that term gets so misunderstood. And there are some fringe people that want to abolish the police. And I get that, but that's crazy. But most people, I think what the phrase means is focus more on social services, providing a reliable safety net, which creates conditions of stability, reduces violence. This is a pattern all around the world. We can learn from war zones by doing this at home, create stability. This will make the cops' job easier. Blue lives, black lives, everybody is in better, everybody's safer, less people die, safety nets are good. So I think what they're trying to say, not to explain whatever, mansplain, whitesplain, whatever, I think what they're trying to say, because their phrase I think is so bad, defund the police is terrible branding, but okay, it is what it is. I think what they're saying is, from everyone I've talked to, focus on social services, less on up-armored vehicles to bust college parties. Who the fuck cares about busting an underage drinking party with a freaking up-armored vehicle? And next time you guys talk to Will, he's got some good stories from Raleigh, North Carolina about that shit. Dumbest stuff you ever heard. Well, focus on that.
As far as defund the police is concerned, it is really, I think it's also a call for performance-based investment in police forces. So if there is a police force that is not performing well, it has maybe certain amount of time necessary to reform or lose funding, and we'll put that money into a place where it can do some work.
Conservatives have applied this to schools for the last 20 years, this idea of school choice.
Yeah.
A way to frame this for conservatives, I think, I might be wrong, I think you could say, hey, the idea for improving schools that you have, whether it's true or not, just apply the logic to the police. If it doesn't sell itself to the community, and there's exceptions for like war zone type communities, but for the most part, if the police if it has just a dumpster fire relationship with the neighborhood for inexcusable reasons, fucking fire it and hire new people, and they should recruit and hire the same way that our elite special operations vets people. It's not just your ability to kick in doors and shoot people. It's your maturity, your integrity, and your intelligence.
I think that's so important. Like what you're talking about, John, is so critical, because I think that is a great sort of like bridge, right? Because you're talking about veterans. What about the idea of veterans going into like veterans of special ops, right?
Yeah.
Going into school, going into police departments, right? And teaching how to deal with a population that you're trying to develop a relationship with, but that you also have to police, right? And so that sort of like that multiple dynamic. And I think that's a great way to sell it to conservatives, right? We're like, hey, look, we spent all that money in Afghanistan doing this. We have 20 years of experience. Like, I like guns. I know how to shoot guns, right? Like, let's get together and talk, You
just that last 30 seconds was, that should be a video. Like, well, you just summed it up. I'm serious. Like, you did. So I've written like 2 articles, and I'm writing a book on the very thing you said about how I've been working for the last 7 years or so. I've been trying to pitch this. Veterans can help teach and coach and work with police. That's spot on. A big thing is not just the training needs to be continuous. A big thing, in Jocko, you guys know Jocko, right? Jocko Willem.
Oh, I know Jocko.
Yeah, talked about this too. How you go through a police academy, that's your training. Then you go, bust fucking 18-year-olds for drinking whatever pot, fucking dumb shit. Training, it should be training. They should be doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or whatever Jiu-Jitsu. They should be doing, civil engagement scenarios where you learn how not to kill someone at a bodega over a loose cigarette. Yes, things are complicated. We do this all the time regularly in special operations or civil affairs or whatever. So training has to be continuous. If you don't do something for a while, you lose your skill. Training in the Army, the idea that training is a continuous ongoing thing is as natural as breathing air. That is standard doctrine. Everywhere in the Army, and I mean this, does training continuously. That is nothing short of that should happen. And
I want to bring this back to a little bit, because it seems like, if we could all agree that the goal was conflict resolution and better results of policing, then I don't think we'd have any trouble. But I think the conservative goal for policing is different. The conservative goal for policing is to bust heads, is to make people afraid, and is to let certain communities know, particularly communities of color, that they are, they are going to get extra attention and extra violence.
Yeah. This is the goal. We need to divide the conservatives that are not like that, the ones that actually do want to see good policing. We need to pit them against, like an intellectual civil war. Full on motherfucking pit the conservatives that are actually against that and that really do want good policing. We need to pit them against the bad conservatives, the ones, the dog whistle, the racists. We need to see a full-on schism, like a full-on
it's true,
Mortal Kombat style schism.
These two are never going to meet. One is going to win, and the other one's going to lose.
But they don't. A lot of conservatives don't realize this conflict exists. Like a lot of moderate conservatives don't seem to realize that a lot of people in their camp are diametrically opposed to American values. They don't see that a lot of conservatives are conservatives for terrible reasons, like you said. They need to that needs to become more obvious. We need 1,000 Lincoln projects across media to say, look, if you're a conservative, your enemies are not just liberals and you should drink beer with liberals like Sean, but you should also realize a lot of the people in your camp are not your friends, and you should call them out.
Right.
I mean, I want to see them. I want to see them fight. I want to see a full-on schism.
So do I.
Well, if they lose in November, let me tell you, there will be. There's going to be a reckoning within the party. Hey, guys, I'm thinking we're somewhere around 90 minutes. I don't even know what the time is right now.
All right.
I'm thinking, there's so much more we could go into. We didn't go into Portland. We didn't go into, there's so many things. But I think we're, at a certain point we lose our audience. People just won't listen to something this long.
Sure.
So, but I really appreciate, John, you coming and taking the time to be here and share your perspectives on it. And
yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank our audience for being with us. And again, we are the Radical Secular, and we'll be coming to you with more good info. And maybe Chris, you could take us out.
Yeah. Just want to say thanks. Obviously, John, conversation was just excellent. I think I had such a nice time talking about this. I think, and I love talking about solutions as well, right? And it sounds like what you're talking about it really is a proposal for conflict resolution and a deep, profound conflict resolution, and I think that's really, really interesting. So just thanks to you, John. Thank you, Sean. Thanks everybody else out there, and MI for life.
Right on. All right. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks again.